Calling the 12. It's interesting in this story, you have the list of men that were disciples. Now, sometimes a person may think that these were kind of down and outers or something like that, which is absolutely not the case at all. Anyone who has studied into these men's lives realized that these were men who had other things to do. They were following Jesus because they knew that He was the Messiah, the Christ, and they were willing to give their lives to Him. These were men that had occupations, families, work to do, oftentimes men of means. It's interesting when the list is given in the Bible, it's always given in twos. Peter and Andrew, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, and so on. It is often felt that this was the fishing boat sitting order. This is how they sat in the boat. The boat was a 15-passenger boat, and the person sitting with you was your oar buddy. So you had the two brothers and the other two brothers up in front and going back. It's also interesting that even though the list puts the leaders up at the top of the list, you also have the fishermen are at the front of the boat. Peter and Andrew, James and John, and maybe Philip. He might have been a fisherman. Interesting, the oar buddy for Philip is Bartholomew. Who is he? It's generally held that Bartholomew was Nathanael, the one that Philip brought to Christ, the one who, can anything good come out of Nazareth? One, I saw you sitting underneath the fig tree. That one right there, that his name was not only Nathanael, but also Bartholomew. Among the men, Judas, the one who betrayed Jesus, all the men were from Galilee except Judas. He was from Judah. Interesting dynamic there because there was a little bit of prejudice going back and forth. The people in Judah felt like the people in Galilee, first of all, weren't really totally Jewish. They weren't as faithful to keeping the law. That was a Roman area up there. It was kind of a outpost for Judaism and a place where a lot of Greeks lived and a lot of Romans. People in Galilee didn't trust people from Judah. So it's interesting that they made Judas the treasurer when trust was kind of an issue. You also have the issue of Peter and Matthew. Peter was a fisherman, and Rome would collect between 30 and 40% of a fishing haul. When the fishermen came in, the tax collector was there. And oftentimes they would run from the revenuer. They would try to get around. They would try to get, and so to have Matthew brought right in to be a part of the team, had probably been a conflict between these two men. You also have Simon, the other Simon, who's called the Zealot. He could have been zealous for the law, or he could have been, most people think, a zealot as far as nationalism. So a Jewish zealot to be with someone named Philip. Philip was a name used by Romans. It was a Greek name. Now, it doesn't mean that Philip was Greek, but there was something there that his name was a actually Roman name. So imagine a little bit of a conflict here as well. The whole issue of keeping the Sabbath. Two things to note here. First of all, the Pharisees sincerely believed that Messiah would come, but only after everybody in Israel would keep the Sabbath 100%, at least once. And of course, there would hardly be any time that everybody would do it. So they were pushing this all the time to get everyone to be faithful to the Sabbath, thinking that was what would bring the Messiah. The other thing was the issue that it was legal to heal on the Sabbath, but only if it was life-threatening. So when they were questioning him, I mean, most of the times when Jesus healed someone on the Sabbath, it would not have been considered life-threatening. But Jesus refers to it as a sheep that falls down into a pit, which is life-threatening, by the way, and that they wouldn't think of anything of pulling him out. Basically, Jesus is saying, well, it's not life-threatening to you, but to the man with the crippled hand. This is a life crisis for him. Anyway, that was the issue. It's interesting, and it used to be when you went to Israel and you got on an elevator on the Sabbath, every button was already programmed to be pushed, and you had to stop on every floor because it was considered work to push the button. An Orthodox Jew would not want to have to push a button to go to his floor. Even today, that's still there, except most hotels now have two elevators. One for the Orthodox Jew on the Sabbath, and the other one for the rest of us, so that we can just push the button to the floor. Well, trust you'll come back next week when we continue on with more story insights on the story of the week. We'll see you next week.